Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so very much for being here, everybody, today. I'm Jesse Sinaiko. I'm Herman's oldest kid, and I'm here to sort of, as he would want to put it, kick off the proceedings this afternoon. Before we begin, I'd like to thank a few people, in particular Catherine Carvunas, John Boyer, Carol Baker, and the CMIG people for doing a tremendous amount of work and really pulling out all the stops. They've done a marvelous job, and everybody in the family, Sinaikos from all over the place, are very, very grateful. And we thank you. We'd also like to thank Ruth and Don Levine, James Redfield and Kathy Atlas, and everybody else who worked on planning this function. They've done a marvelous job, and again, we're really very grateful. My dad was a pretty interesting guy. He was a pretty multifaceted individual. You can hear a lot of different things about him today. I'm going to start off talking about something that maybe isn't really going to be the main thrust of what you're going to hear about, but I think it informed pretty much everything he did in both his professional and personal lives, and in a sense explains what he stood for and why he ended up doing what he did. And notwithstanding all the things that good parents impart on their kids, this part of him has influenced me the most in my life, and I hope very much like him, it informs what I've done, whatever that might be in my life. So it's important. It's a big deal, at least it is to me. I've never worn a turtleneck in my life. I think you're looking at the Ilya Kuryakin Appreciation Society up here. And they're pretty uncomfortable, you know. But today I am because of what it represented to him. And what that was, I think, was rebellion, inattention to authority, and everything that isn't symbolized by the evil necktie. I'm sorry to see a few of them out there, but what are you going to do? Maybe it was a matter of comfort to him, but if I remember correctly, I don't think so. Anyhow, what I'm really talking about here is his political point of view. It wasn't something he wore on his sleeve, much less his neck, at least not most of the time, but it did permeate most elements of his life. He grew up in an environment in scenic Newark, New Jersey, that valued political discourse, and there was lots of it. Different sides of his family had very different ideas about how the planet should be ordered. There were a lot of arguments, some of them pretty intense from what he told me. He certainly knew which side of the conversation he came out on. He never called himself a red diaper baby. I don't think he saw himself that way. But it is a fact that his mother was a card-carrying member of the CP until the day after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August of 1939. So we can, draw our own conclusions from that. And he wasn't really an activist either. He had strong political convictions. He didn't do a whole lot of political work. He did do a little bit. He worked for Len Dupre, who was a longtime independent alderman of our ward, the 5th Ward here in Hyde Park, back in 1959. I remember it because I was 5 years old, and he dragged me along to do door-to-door canvassing. I particularly remember one time when we went to an apartment building. It's still there across the street from our house on the 5300 block of Greenwood. It's a big courtyard building, and you were supposed to go to canvass at about 7 at night, right before or after dinner. Everybody's usually home. You can get their opinions. And so I was trailing along after him. He was knocking on doors and promoting the candidacy of Len Dupre. Every time we knocked at an apartment door, and this I certainly remember, it was answered by a young woman, usually dressed in some sort of kind of 90s sort of getup. And years later, when I was a grown-up, he did remind me that they all assured him that they were going to vote for Dupre. But he also pointed out, and of course I wasn't aware of it at that time, that most of the apartments in this building were occupied by young women who worked for a living, mainly in the evening. He thought it was pretty funny. That was a different time in Hyde Park. Hyde Park in some ways is the same as it's always been, but in some ways it's changed a lot. The university's also changed. The community that he arrived at in the fall of 1945 as a 16-year-old Hutchins baby, he was a red diaper baby, he was a Hutchins baby, he was just a lot of babies, was beyond, a few old faculty members and the folks who owned the packing houses who lived in Kenwood. It was a pretty wide open place. There were over 20 bars on 55th Street between Cottage Grove and Lake Park. There was a lot of jazz. Charlie Parker used to play there. It was also well-to-do. It was working class. There was a lot of street life. It had a lot of crime. It wasn't quiet. A lot of the housing stock had deteriorated severely. Just his kind of place. And he took to it, both the school and the neighborhood. He stayed here after he got his BA. At that point in his life, as you'll hear later on, it wasn't all that clear that he was going to end up an academic. He told me many times that he really hadn't planned it out very closely and hadn't given it a lot of thought, certainly not when he was 18 years old. So to some degree, he was here because he liked the place, along with the university, but it wasn't just the university. Well, okay, to digress slightly, the quote from Dad on the program, the one about Plato and Aristotle arguing on the wall of the Campanile in Florence. He showed that to me when I was about 14, the first time we were in Florence. It's a fantastic choice to put up there. It's really marvelous. He talked about it a lot. He loved that relief and what it represented. Passionate argument, as he said. But he also says earlier in the clause, or quoted what he imagined Plato was saying as, forget the damn text, man, look at the big picture. Think about the big questions. The big questions in the big picture were as important to him as passionate argument. After all, passionate argument does require something to argue about. It has to be about something. And to him, the main something, the biggest question, I think, professionally, personally, in his heart, involved social justice and an ordering of the planet that gave everybody on the planet a decent chance, human rights, human services, an opportunity, in fact, a right to be involved in the ordering and structuring of this place. Certainly a political question that required a political point of view. And again, that point of view centered on social justice and freedom from a highly hierarchical society. He didn't really get into that very much in his teaching. It was about teaching people how to think critically. He didn't feel the need, nor did he believe it was appropriate to dwell on his particular point of view. But he had confidence in it, and he had certainly, had confidence that he did his job well, which he did, and that most of the people he engaged with would, on their own, come to that or a similar point of view. Or maybe not, but as long as they came to it thoughtfully, honestly, and intelligently, he could live with it. And if he disagreed, he was more than willing to argue about it, passionately. Which brings me back to where he lived and worked and how he saw the changes that evolved, or some would say shoehorned, into both the community and the institution. Earlier this year, before he knew he was ill, I asked him as a long-serving faculty member, and at that time I didn't really realize that he was the longest-serving faculty member presently at the university, perhaps in the history of the university, how he was seen by his younger colleagues. And he thought about it for a second, and he said, guys like me and Levine were dinosaurs. In fact, maybe we're not even dinosaurs, we're dinosaur bones. Well, he accepted that. I don't think he was all that impressed by it, however. So yes, both the institution and the community that surrounds it have changed. And he understood and acknowledged that, although again, he wasn't all that thrilled by some of those changes. But he certainly did love the U of C in Hyde Park. But still, in 1945, when he got here, this was sort of a hardscrabble, lively, and moderately decrepit community surrounding a university that was eventually investigated by HUAC, the House Committee on Un-American Activities. This place was a hotbed of commies, or at least some seem to believe that, and that was fine with him. He left it as a well-to-do bedroom community with 3 or 4 bars, not the 20 that were on one street alone. And he left it, the university that is, as an institution that's in the process of hosting a place. Some say it's the U of C's own version of, well, okay. Let me put it to you this way. When I was about 9, 1963, Dad won the Quantrell Award, which is an award the university gives out for excellence in teaching and instruction. I believe they still do. He took I think it was $100 that he got, and bought his first electric typewriter with it. One day we were walking home from campus. I'd come to see him on campus after school, and I asked him, so this award was given to you because you're a good teacher, right? And he said, yeah, that's right. And I said, and is the University of Chicago a good college, like Harvard or Yale? And he said, yes, a little bit different, but good like Harvard or Yale. So then I asked whether all the teachers at this good college were good. And he stopped for a minute and he thought about that. And I remember we were right on the corner of 57th and University by the entrance to Mandel Hall. It was a nice warm spring day. And he gave it a little more thought, and he said, well, you know, there's a couple of SOBs in economics. The older I got, the more I respected him for that. Those weren't dinosaur bones talking. His point was as relevant now as it was in 1963. You know, unfortunately, along with the resurgence of the Bears, he missed the Occupy Wall Street stuff by a couple of weeks. I know for a fact, though, he would have loved the activism involved with that. He would have agreed with it. He knew he was part of and with the 99%. He gave many things to me, but in the end, his politics and worldview are what I'm really most grateful for and what I care about the most. Thanks.
I'm Arthur DEVENPORT, not David Sinaiko. We've changed places. And I've come to really to praise Herman. On the day after he died, a group of old friends and colleagues gathered at Herman's and Susan House to share memories and stories. One was about an occasion years ago. A request was made to former students who might like to offer testimonials in support of an academic promotion for which Herman was being considered. Within a short time, there were over 200 responses, and they stopped. They didn't need any more. I was last a classroom student of Herman's over 35 years ago. Soon afterwards, he recommended me for a teaching job in the basic program, where I taught for 25 years. We were friends over this whole time. So he was to me both a teacher and a friend. Herman taught many of the great humanistic texts, but Plato the most. And of Plato's dialogues, those most concerned with learning the intellectual connection between the old and the young, how knowledge and inquiry into knowledge could best be had in this world. That night at his house, someone else asked how Herman pushed students into thinking harder. H.GABEL aptly commented that Herman didn't push, he pulled. This is true. Herman always insisted, somehow gently and vigorously at the same time. He always drew you out, questioned you, pulled you forward from your initial judgments towards better ones. This experience had a physical as well as an intellectual dimension. Aaron Halper, a student of Herman's who graduated from the college last June, and he's returned from his graduate philosophy courses to be here today, wrote in a letter that he showed me that as he talked, Herman, he would grow increasingly excited about the text and wave his hands about the room. I suspect this gut gesturing would have distracted me from his words had not his eyes, which gleamed whenever he talked seriously, drawn me in so that I hung on his every word. But he never got so excited as when I would disagree with him. To many teachers, it's annoying at best when a young student questions his professor. Mr. Sinaiko was not one of those teachers. Instead, from behind his large glasses, his eyes would light up all the more, and he would talk all the more exuberantly. As a student, this encouraged me to take an active part in our conversations and to think for myself, which of course was what Mr. Sinaiko wanted all along. I too remember Herman this way in the classroom, walking about excitedly, throwing elbows and eyebrows, planting the palm of his hand on his forehead. Usually it stuck there for a while. catching you as you finish talking and pulling you a bit farther and a bit farther. In class or in tutorial, he always created an atmosphere in which discussion, questioning, and the desire to learn appeared and grew and ended with the anticipation of the next time. As great a teacher as Herman was, I think the greatest teacher of his generation, I also came to appreciate and respect and love him equally as a man and as a friend. Herman always seemed to me remarkably free of pettiness and vanity in surroundings where this virtue is hard to achieve. And especially, he possessed a natural kindliness and a natural integrity, accompanied by a simple and thorough dignity. My admiration for him grew as I aged and gained experience. As a teacher, as a friend, as a man, Herman embodied a measure of goodness possible in life. His many students over the years were deeply affected by these qualities, both those they experienced in class and those they could reflect on later. He became a moral and intellectual touchstone to generations who made their way through the college during almost half the lifetime of the university. This is from the Phaedrus. Finer still is the serious treatment of those subjects which you find when a man employs the art of dialectic and, fastening upon a suitable soul, plants and sows in it truths accompanied by knowledge. Such truths can defend themselves as well as the man who planted them. They are not sterile, but contain a seed from which fresh truths spring up in other minds. In this way, they secure immortality for it and confer upon the man who possesses it the highest happiness which it is possible for a human being to enjoy. To this, I think, can be added Aaron Halpern's remarks in the last paragraph of his letter. I only knew Mr. Sinaiko in his role as a teacher, but Mr. Sinaiko's teaching has had a profound impact on my life. From the 4 years that I spent as his student and from reading an essay he wrote called Energizing the Classroom, The Structure of Teaching, in his book Reclaiming the Canon, I learned of the tremendous effect that a good teacher can have on his or her students. More than that, I learned that I too want to be a teacher. If I can be even half the teacher that Mr. Sinaiko was, it will be a profession well worth devoting my life to. I wish Herman were sitting here among us. I think he would be deeply pleased at these words of his student.
I'm David Sinaiko. The moment of engagement, that's what my dad lived for. And as a teacher myself and a performing artist, a teaching artist, as we sometimes call ourselves now, I feel that his greatest gift to me, and perhaps to many of you here today and out in the world, was an understanding of the profound value of the moment of engagement, the spark between people grappling face to face with something together. When my wife and kids and I visited my dad here last July during one of his briefer stays at MICHEL, he treated us all to an impromptu seminar from his hospital bed on Hannah Arendt's thoughts on the inherent quality of humans as creative beings. And we've been having a terrific rambling conversation, all of us, about Italy, about politics. And of course, when the topic eventually drifted towards philosophy, I wonder how that happened, my dad just took off with it, as he was wont to do. And a nurse's aide who had come in to take his vital signs in the middle of the lesson, ended up staying to listen. "I don't want to leave," she said. "I just got to hear this." We were all rapt. In September, during the last days that I was able to spend with my dad, the minutes in which he was able to muster the energy to consciously interact with visitors were increasingly fleeting. But that's not to say that he wasn't still deeply engaged much of the time. As some of you who were able to visit him during those days may have seen, he was spending a lot of time in a sort of series of unconscious internal interactions. Sometimes he would speak, answering a question or offering thoughts or advice on an issue or idea that only he could hear. And he was gesturing, like Chip said, a lot. Gestures that were so familiar to me, making a point, mulling a thought, picking through the parts of a problem. It was clear that he was still, at his core, actively discussing, thinking, professing, teaching. He went down teaching. He was, at his essence, a genuine teacher, an educator, an educer, one who draws out, or, as Merriam-Webster says, develops things, especially from a latent or potential state. The vast majority of you here today know that, know it from a different perspective than I do, really, because I never took his class or taught alongside him. I never submitted a paper for him to grade or developed a curriculum with him. But of course, he taught me many things, as a good father does, both in his sharing of information and experience with me and by example. And as someone who spends a good deal of time teaching, I've come to see how profoundly he's influenced me as a teacher. And by way of illustrating this, I'll share with you a few things you might not know about my dad. Before he escaped Maplewood, New Jersey, to take up residence in the gray city here that would become his home for the rest of his life, he was a Boy Scout. He actually achieved the penultimate rank of Life Scout, very nearly making the top level of Eagle Scout. This was not insignificant in his development, as it helped lay a foundation for his lifelong enjoyment of nature, the outdoors, walking in the woods, casual bird watching. It's where he learned the basic sailing skills that he eventually taught me. He was a pretty good amateur builder, too, something he really enjoyed in between the inevitably hammered thumb, the bent nail, and the loudly growled, cathartic stream of free-flowing, highly profane invective that always followed, peppering his work on a project. His great achievement in this realm of building was the large screen porch that he designed and built and rebuilt once, little over 40 years ago, off the high side of our little cottage in Michigan. He was so proud of building that porch, and he should have been, as it still stands today. He loved taking walks, and I often, as a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old, would tag along with him as he walked with Norman McLean and Norman's Flask in Washington Park or the forest preserves. And this brings me back to that essential teacher that we all knew him to be, and to a story that he liked to tell about a walk he and I took together once in Michigan. We decided to walk from our cottage near the beach to town, a walk of about 3.5 miles that we'd always talked about doing. I was about 5 at the time, and it was, as it turned out, a pretty long walk for a little kid on a hot summer day. I'm sure we talked about a lot of things as we walked, probably about baseball some. I'd like to ask him about his work and have him tell me particularly about Socrates. It was clear to me at a very young age that even though he'd written his book on Plato and was a devoted teacher of Aristotle, that Socrates was his guy. Socrates was the one that compelled him. So maybe he took some time to explain to me about the teacher-student sequence that began with Socrates and found its way to Alexander and beyond, or about how Socrates wasn't about documenting ideas, that was Plato's bag, but about the face-to-face grappling with ideas in the agora. About 2/3 of the way along, we stopped by the side of a long stretch of blacktopped road for a rest and to sip from our canteen, and there I happened to notice some words spray-painted onto the blacktop by someone, and as I was just in the process of beginning to learn how to read, I took the opportunity to get some practice in. And my dad stood beside me patiently as I sounded out the words letter by letter, helping me, prodding me, and prompting me as necessary to help me work my way through. I got to the end, and reading lesson over, we finished our walk. I can't even remember if I even asked him at that time what it meant, but I only learned much, much later that while he helped me that day, setting me on the way to learning the skill of careful reading that he probably considered among the most important a person could master, he was also laughing hysterically to himself. The words I had sounded out were actually, as he recalled it, a fairly profane bit of graffiti, one that cannot be appropriately, explicitly repeated in this solemn space, but which amounted to this statement, "I deflowered a maiden here." Now, I tell you this story now because, not only because I knew it was one that we enjoyed recalling together over the years, but also because I feel it is, in a way, emblematic of his wonderful qualities as a teacher. Deciphering those symbols into sounds and the sounds into words was the goal, the big picture, if you will, at that time. We could get to the meaning of the words later. It was about the moment of engagement with a problem, a question, or a thought, and the drawing out, the adducing of ideas and solutions from that engagement. And I think that was the basis of his love for teaching here in the college, where the students are still so fresh and curious, so ready to be opened up and drawn out before they've specialized, unconcerned with base ambition, young enough to still be wowed at the realization that with each answer or discovery they achieve comes an exponential number more questions and mysteries. And no matter the scope of his teaching, whether he was with a student, a colleague, a friend, a grandchild, doling out advice, or working through a problem, presenting a formal argument, or taking someone to coffee to talk them down from some metaphorical ledge or other, he lived for the engagement. And based on the many accounts, stories, testimonials, and anecdotes from his 66 years as a student and teacher here, pretty sure everyone here knows what I mean. And in a way, this represents both the qualities that made him special as a teacher and which may have contributed to the relatively small amount of, in quotes, greater public acknowledgement that he received for his work. The most important part of which came in the moments between people in real time to be grappled with, heard, and felt, but not necessarily documented. That was, after all, Plato's bag. It was, in essence, improvisation in its purest form, something that has shaped me profoundly in my work both as a teacher and as a performer. As I sat by him in the final days I was able to spend with him, engaging when I could, speaking a bit of Shakespeare to him, I could see plainly, bluntly, how he was this essential teacher as he gesticulated and professed in his internal seminars. And at one point he lay on his side, holding his hands in front of him like this, intently reading a book that only he could see. And I asked him what he was reading, and he answered me uncharacteristically, "It's out of your depth. You wouldn't understand half these words." So I asked him what the words were. Maybe I could get a bit of a reading lesson like I had 44 years earlier. And he just looked at me and shrugged. And we left it at that.
I'm Don Levine, friend and colleague of Herman's for 6 decades. And we also co-taught several times. I have a fairly good sense of his teaching style. He really placed emphasis on the opening line of a text. So I'm going to ask you all, please, to do that now as I begin my remarks. I rise to celebrate the love, the knowledge, and the discourse which Herman Sinaiko bore toward the University of Chicago. In the beginning was the love, and Herman couldn't wait. An early entrant at 16, he reached these grounds in autumn 1945 and his baccalaureate 2 years later. Those were years when Robert Maynard Hutchins championed the most serious kind of intellectual endeavor these United States could tolerate for the very young. Herman sat thrilled under such teaching giants as Clarence Faust, dean of the college in one of its most generative moments, and Joseph Jackson Schwab, pedagogue super extraordinaire. The Hutchins College imprinted him for life. Then came the knowledge. As Herman sojourned in the Committee on Social Thought, that's when I met him, in a breathtaking seminar with Robert Redfield, where young intellectuals in training, we spotted each other. Herman zoomed as the one fellow student whom it was fun to keep training with. I was awed by his doctoral project. Read Plato in Greek? Read Confucius in Mandarin? Dare compare those axial figures? And learn tons from him, as I did ever after. Then came the what? Discourse, right. Okay, you've been paying attention. Early 60s, when I came back to Hyde Park, we rejoined and started talking. The theme, you've guessed, was how to revivify the Hutchins spirit and the culture we had come to cherish in the college. When Wayne Booth became dean, Herman kept on talking. In a small group with Wayne, James Redfield, and others, in a bid to construct a fresh and ridiculously ambitious 4-year curriculum of liberal arts. When that didn't pan out, he helped fashion the course we brazenly called Liberal Arts 1. Any alumni here of that? Which he taught with the passion and brilliance that marked his whole career. Herman not only analyzed Socratic dialectic, how keen he was to dissect the logic of the Phaedrus and the Parmenides. He practiced it all the time, masterfully. His preference for college teaching reflected the wish to follow his hero Socrates in finding the locus of philosophic truth in dramatic confrontations among engaged interlocutors. I think we're on the same wave there. And then a dozen years later, it seemed inexorable, like a rolling stone, that Herman would join me to generate another wave of innovations to the college. Thanks to growing psychological sophistication he brought to his tenure as dean of students in the college, a deft and sympathetic concern for the emotional welfare of students. Our goal, he loved to say, was to make students happier, not by dumbing down in academic work, but because happier students make more engaged and successful students in a demanding curriculum. He and our colleagues found 100 ways to do that, and I'm glad Jean TREESE is here to speak to that as well. I always knew Herman was good, but just how good I learned, excuse me, but just how good I learned only when it became time to honor him with a long-deserved promotion to the status of full professor. Since his energies had not gone into research and publication, it seemed that a compelling case for promotion might be made if we could tap the voices of the thousands of students who had learned with him across the decades. This initiative was supported by General Studies in the Humanities, one of the college's distinctive programs which Herman inherited from the incomparable Norman MacLean and which he came to direct with flagrant devotion. Friends, neither I nor anyone in the central administration was prepared for the avalanche of letters from all parts of the country, from across several generations, from former students who took time to create effusive statements that attested the transforming impact of Herman's teaching on their lives. That said, why not let his students speak in their own voice? Listen to these words penned by members of one class. Quote, "It is said that a truly great teacher is one who can lead you to the threshold of your mind and help you discover what you already know. They are rare and extraordinary human beings. We feel privileged to have had such a teacher." Well, Herman, we really can't let students have the last word. Sure, those students got it mostly right. Herman Sinaiko was indeed a rare and extraordinary human being, but he also challenged his students and us, his colleagues, to see how much we did not know that we really should have known. For that, too, we were privileged to have had such a teacher. And so, for more than half a century, was this university to which Professor Sinaiko devoted so much discourse and knowledge and love. Thank you.
I'm Eve Sinaiko. I'm going to read a poem, Yeats's Among School Children, and I just want to give you a few words of context. It's too bad that Bon Chapel doesn't have a chalkboard, or I'd try to do you one of Herman's huge, incomprehensible diagrams with circles and arrows and the divided line and the distinction between poiesis and leistanomai and some White Sox box scores. Herman particularly loved this poem, so much so that long ago, when he was 20 years younger than the Yeats of the poem, he commissioned Virgil Burnett to write it out fine and illuminate it. And the text with its beautiful drawings hung in our living room for many years. He taught it often, he wrote about it. It is, among other things, an apologia for the work of a teacher. But it wasn't just a favorite poem. He didn't just think it was a good work of art. He had an idea that some poems are fundamental. That's a favorite word of his. And as recently as last May, we talked about this. It was a repeated conversation. I could never get him to say exactly what he meant by that, but I think it was this. In the ancient quarrel between art and philosophy, there are some works of art that come to grips directly with the core questions of philosophy. And when this happens, and because art is able to operate on so many levels at once, the effect is transformative and enlightening. Paul Valery defines a poem as a prolonged hesitation between sound and sense. And I think for my father, the key works of art were those in which that extended equivocation or negotiation between beauty and meaning offers space for a more profound understanding of and access to the things that matter: justice, truth, and the good. I'll just mention also that this poem begins with the act of questioning, and by the time we get to the end, we find out what the question is. That comes as close to a credo as my father ever got. Okay. I walk through the long schoolroom questioning. A kind old nun in a white hood replies, "The children learn to cipher and to sing, to study reading books and histories, to cut and sew, be neat in everything, in the best modern way." The children's eyes in momentary wonder stare upon a 60-year-old smiling public man. I dream of a Lydean body bent above a sinking fire, a tale that she told of a harsh reproof or trivial event that changed some childish day to tragedy, told, and it seemed that our two natures blent into a sphere from youthful sympathy, or else to alter Plato's parable into the yolk and white of the one shell. And thinking of that fit of grief or rage, I look upon one child or t'other there, and wonder if she stood so at that age. For even daughters of the swan can share something of every paddler's heritage, and had that color upon cheek or hair. And thereupon my heart is driven wild. She stands before me as a living child. Her present image floats into the mind. Did Quattrocento finger fashion it, hollow of cheek as though it drank the wind and took a mess of shadows for its meat? And I, though never of Lydian kind, had pretty plumage once. Enough of that. Better to smile and all that smile and show. There is a comfortable kind of old scarecrow. What youthful mother, a shape upon her lap, honey of generation had betrayed, and that must sleep, shriek, struggle to escape, as recollection or the drug decide, would think her son, did she but see that shape with 60 or more winters on its head, a compensation for the pang of his birth or the uncertainty of his setting forth? Plato thought nature but a spume that plays upon a ghostly paradigm of things. Solider Aristotle played the tawse upon the bottom of a king of kings. World-famous golden-thighed Pythagoras fingered upon a fiddlestick or strings what a star sang and careless muses heard, old clothes upon old sticks to scare a bird. Both nuns and mothers worship images, but those the candles light are not as those that animate a mother's reveries, but keep a marble or a bronze repose, and yet they too break hearts. O presences that passion, piety, or affection knows, and that all heavenly glory symbolize, O self-born mockers of man's enterprise. Labor is blossoming or dancing where the body is not bruised to pleasure soul, nor beauty born out of its own despair, nor blear-eyed wisdom out of midnight oil. O chestnut tree, great-rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? O body swayed to music, O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance?
My name is Bill Michael, and I was very fortunate to have Herman Sinaiko as my first boss at the university. Much has been said about Herman as an incredible teacher in the classroom. Over the last few weeks, some of his former students have written me to share their fond memories. As one 2002 GSU major said, when in his class, I often felt like his lectures cracked open the sky above, and pouring down on me came knowledge and illumination. I know it sounds extreme, but this is the only way I can describe that feeling. Professor Sinaiko not only expanded my mind by showing how a prism of text can reveal a rainbow of thoughts, but also shaped my soul, because his intellect was intertwined with an ethical humanism, and all his ideas were colored by a deep sense of compassion for his fellow human beings. A 1999 first-year student in his HBC class wrote, "The list of moments wherein Professor Sinaiko simply broke my mind is too long to enumerate. But one instance stands out in particular. It was our first day discussing Aristotle, and he wrote a sentence of text on the board. He began tearing into it, demanding that we keep up with him, daring the class to make sense of the enormity of the conception of life, not just for the purpose of being able to write a paper about it, but also so that we internalize its meaning and apply it. After that 90-minute class, in a whirlwind of heated debate, Socratic frustration, and chalk dust floating in the air, we concluded that Aristotle had declared that life is a series of choices to be made, all of which must be aimed towards the ultimate good of happiness. Did Professor Sinaiko teach me how to think? No, he taught me, teach me how to think better. No, he taught me how to think. While unfortunately I never took a class with Herman, I'm one of many, who benefited from the generous teaching he did every day in every interaction that he had. 20 years ago, when I decided to stay at the university to become director of university theater, I had just begun to appreciate what I would learn from Herman. His passion for the college and our students was infectious, and he helped me understand that the best way to create an environment that encourages creativity is to ask the right questions and encourage our students to look for unexpected answers. Herman was an incredible advocate for student arts. As faculty director of university theater, he was adamant that the arts were one of the central places where students should lead the way. I have fond memories of climbing the Gates Blake stairs to find Herman in his office, moving a few stacks of paper so I could find a place to sit, and then talking with me about the latest idea that students had brought to him. Whether it was a student who wanted to put on a play in a campus fountain, or the students that were ready to revive the Festival of the Arts, Herman's approach was simple. There must be a way for us to help them make this happen. In 1995, Alan Lesage, a filmmaker and student lighting designer with University Theater, who wanted to create a new student filmmaking group, was inspired by UT's rise from a grassroots student group, said, if UT could do it, so could he and the other university student filmmakers. One of the best decisions Alan made was to reach out to Herman. With a call from Herman to the dean of the college to fund some film equipment, Alan and his friends created Fire Escape Productions, so named because the first meeting was held on the fire escape outside of Herman's office. But it wasn't just the call to get the funding. It was Herman's unwavering belief that anything was possible as long as you kept at it, and the encouragement that he provided to our students to do great things. As one fire escape student said, fire escape gives you opportunity to create, but only to the extent to which you're willing to push your own production. Almost every spring when Herman was faculty director at UT, hundreds of students would gather in his backyard to celebrate another great year at University Theater. While the food and drink were wonderful, what was far more important was the genuine respect and care that Herman showed for the many students at UT. He went out of his way to be sure that they felt valued, asking probing questions about the shows they were producing and taking every opportunity to help them think about why the art they were creating mattered. Students always looked forward to going to the Sinaiko home, and perhaps it was no surprise when Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright David Auburn's production of Proof opened on Broadway that the set, a faculty member's house, looked incredibly similar to the Sinaiko residence. Many of the advances we've made in the arts today are because of the incredible passion and commitment of our students. That passion and commitment was cultivated over many years by Herman, and without him, many of our students would not have had the rich experiences, inside and outside the classroom, that make the University of Chicago such a wonderful place. Herman was my teacher, in the best sense of that word. He taught me to care and be compassionate. He taught me to ask probing questions. And most importantly, he taught me to value and respect the ideas of others, no matter how off the wall or impossible they seemed. One of the many legacies that Herman has left all of us is the innumerable opportunities our students have to create art that matters to them. Art that dares us to make a sense of the enormity of this conception of life, and hopefully create in all of us a deep sense of compassion for our fellow human beings.
Hello, I'm Jean TREESE, and I'm wearing two hats. Herman Sinaiko was one of my favorite professors during my time in the college. And then I was lucky enough to have him as my boss when he became Dean of Students in the college in 1982. In 1964-65, I took Hume 3, a year-long sequence in aesthetics and criticism. Everyone said that Herman Sinaiko was the very best professor in that sequence, even though he was very young. I did not get into his section, but I was bold enough to ask him if I could audit his class if I promised to go attend every class that I was assigned to and do all the work for that class, which I did. He agreed, and I realized from the first class that he was the superior teacher. At the end of the quarter, he announced loudly in class, "Miss Sitterly, I think you have been such a loyal member of our class, I should allow you to register for it next quarter." I was thrilled. Before our first paper was due, a student asked him, "How do you grade?" "Well," he replied, "you can answer the question correctly and I will give you a C. If you want a B, the paper should be well written." It didn't seem like he was going to go on. So someone meekly asked, "What do we have to do to get an A?" He answered, "You have to teach me something." Anna Siegler, one of my classmates in the college, who could not be here today, wanted me to share her thoughts about Herman. I recall how Herman embodied, personified even, the dialogues of Plato that he taught. A vivid image that captured this for me was the state of the blackboard at each class session progressed. The board would be clean when we started class, and then gradually, as Herman delved into the dialogue we were studying, he would write key points and draw lines to connect one insight to another, circling, underlining, adding emphasis, creating a visual mapping of our discoveries during these sessions. The board was an unholy, indecipherable mess when class was over. A visitor might well have asked, "What happened here?" The blackboard looked like a war zone. No one could have retraced our conversation from that blackboard, and that was okay. Our process was unfolding, unique, organic, dynamic. The process was the essence of the class. At the heart of it all was Herman, engaged, excited, encouraging, and energetically drawing us out. The crowded blackboard captured that process, which in itself was the point of the class and the essence of how and what Herman taught us. When Herman became dean, I met with him with a first-year student because I thought that student was making a bad decision to leave the college after just one quarter. The student explained to Herman, "I can read all this stuff, like Plato, which I already read in high school. I can read this on my own and not to have to pay this outrageous tuition." Herman quietly responded, "I have been reading, discussing, studying, and writing about Plato for almost 30 years, and I am still learning new things every day." Some of my colleagues in the Dean of Students office wanted me to emphasize that Herman's personal qualities endeared him to his staff and students. He was enthusiastic, inclusive, and respectful. He sometimes would become giddy with excitement when a staff member or a student or a group of students came to him with an exciting new idea. He usually jumped on board immediately. Even when he had to say no to a student, he always did it in a respectful way, and the students appreciated him for that. He wanted to expand the role and the status of advisors by having all of us take on special responsibilities that would increase our campus-wide presence and respect. During Herman's tenure as Dean of Students, we experienced many positive changes in the college. He fostered collaborative relationships with all the other university offices that worked with college students, including the campus ministers. He created an in-house and less intimidating way for students to seek help with mental issues and study skills. I know that was Susie's influence, which eventually morphed into our current accessible and humane SCRS. He recognized that it was important to offer more support for our students applying for prestigious scholarships and fellowships. He was proactive regarding students with special needs. He encouraged the development of better ways, now formalized, to work with students who wanted to study abroad. He was extremely supportive to me personally. When he promoted me to Director of Orientation, he allowed me to have free range in improving the program. He also supported me in creating, with the help of faculty and staff all over the university, our very first Parents' Day. He held a special place in his heart for the general studies and the humanities students who had quirky ideas about creating their own majors from disparate fields. He even had monthly dinners at his home for them. He was instrumental, as you heard, in the formation and the success of the student-run University Theater and Fire Escape films. And this list could go on and on. Through his spirit and his love of teaching, Herman inspired so many of us. Students, staff, and colleagues. We will miss him.
Hi, I'm Steve Gabel, a longtime friend of Herman's and currently in working for the university. I'm here to read briefly something that I want to say, but before I do that, I want to read something that the Dean of the College, John Boyer, wrote. He can't be here with us today to read it himself. Notwithstanding these two pieces, I will be brief. Herman Sinaiko's career incorporated and symbolized much of the history of the college over the last 60 years. Herman was a brilliant and engaged teacher. He taught a very large number of topics and subjects in a diversity of brilliantly designed courses in literature and philosophy, and did so with a passionate enthusiasm and a clarity of vision that was truly remarkable. Herman was awarded the Quantrell Prize in 1963, and in the same year, a senior colleague remarked about Herman's role in teaching the humanities at Chicago that, quote, "He seems to me to be exactly the kind of person without which our college cannot prosper. An articulate, wide-ranging, extremely well-informed, energetic, and likable young scholar who bridges the transition between the old and new college in a most impressive way. My impression from conversations with students is that he has a wide and well-founded reputation as a sort of intellectual storm center. And whatever else the college may desire in its faculty, it seems that it must cherish this capacity above all others," unquote. It is remarkable that one could have said exactly the same thing about Herman's teaching and his role in the college over 47 years later. Herman was not only irrepressibly dedicated to the cause of general and liberal education in Chicago, but he was also a first-rate critic and an enlightened reader of a very rare sort, one whose probing questions and stimulating comments about the work of his students had a magical effect in helping several generations of talented young men and women to educate themselves, Chicago style. But Herman was also an immensely important and influential advocate for improving the quality of student life on our campus. I remember, that's John Boyer remembering, with great fondness and considerable gratitude, the several conversations that I had with Herman in which he strongly advocated for more high-quality residential facilities on our campus. As early as 1997, Herman argued forcefully that, quote, given our present housing stock, scattered all over the neighborhood and largely acquired piecemeal and for reasons extraneous to our college housing needs, why not develop a long-term plan policy to gradually get rid of those outlying properties and move the bulk of our undergrads back either onto campus or much closer to campus, unquote. Herman also urged that leaders of the college become more centrally involved in advocating for dramatic improvements in the residential system, and insisting that, quote, the college as an institution has focused almost exclusively on curriculum and treated all other aspects of student life and concern as outside its jurisdiction, unquote. 10 years earlier, Herman had put the issue even more bluntly. If the college is to fulfill its mission under the extraordinary pressures which it will be facing in the years to come, it must have clear responsibility for its own students and all those aspects of their lives which directly contribute to the quality of their education and of their lives. I must confess that Herman's forceful articulation of these issues has had a profound impact on my thinking about the college from the mid-1990s on. And I do know that Herman was both pleased and delighted with the progress that we have made in the last 12 years in bringing over 1,500 students back to the central campus in the new Palevsky Residential Commons and in the new South Campus Residence Hall. Both of these magnificent buildings are striking tributes to Herman's vision of high-quality on-campus housing and for his broader belief that the college must concern itself deeply with the quality of student life and student morale outside the classroom. Herman was also an ardent advocate of student-organized theater, as you've heard, at the University of Chicago, and it is no exaggeration to say that we owe the founding and the ongoing success of our student-run theater program, University Theater, to Herman's vision and energy when he was dean of students in the college. Herman argued at the time that with only a small investment, our students would be able to do great things precisely because they were University of Chicago students. He backed up his confidence at a crucial moment when he asked his administrative assistant to work only half-time for him and devote the rest of his efforts to serving as the founding director of University Theater. Finally, Herman was an equally strong advocate of improving and strengthening career advising services for our students and for providing well-funded and well-organized student athletic programs. In all of these interventions, Herman Sinaiko was an ideal citizen of the college. He loved the place, and most importantly, he loved the students. He understood that for the college to succeed, we must concern ourselves with student welfare on all fronts, and that in a college with a supremely demanding academic curriculum, support and encouragement for our students outside the classroom is all the more essential and vital to our success. In a word, Herman understood that we rise or fall as a caring, supportive community of friends, and not simply as isolated individuals left to the vagaries of life in Hyde Park or around the world. Herman's intellectual vibrancy, his love of critically engaged teaching, his prowess as a designer of brilliant and efficacious courses, and his dedication to the total welfare of our students were legendary. He leaves a lasting legacy of insisting upon excellence for our community in all of its humane and humanistic dimensions, a community to which he was so intensely and powerfully dedicated throughout his career at Chicago. Now, if I may indulge myself with a couple of words. Herman was my friend for many, many years, but first I was his student. I was his student as a bachelor's student, as a master's, and also when I started my PhD program. A few of the students in social thought approached Herman to do a reading course, officially called a tutorial, on Plato's Republic. A tutorial consisted of a few of us meeting in Herman's office each week to go over the text together. One of the special conceits of the Committee on Social Thought in those days was the irrelevancy of the quarter system, not to mention formal courses. So I can't properly recall for how long we met. We felt we had all the time in the world. I think we actually met for about 2 quarters, long enough to conclude that we never finished with the Republic. In fact, one of the most important things I learned from working with Herman and the other students in that tutorial was the harder one tried to finish the Republic, the deeper one became enmeshed. I've taught it in the core, and I know it can be covered in 3 weeks or even less, but if one gives it more time, one will never get to the end. I can't recall that I learned from Herman some particular reading of the Republic or Plato's teaching. He taught us that it was a deadly serious book, also a playful book, that would repay any amount of time spent with it. That was an important lesson. Sadly, we have lost in Herman an interlocutor who was always serious, always playful, and always a friend with whom it was wonderful to spend time.
I'm going to read another favorite poem of our favorite persons who did not go gentle, although with that same fierceness, he protected us in life in every way he could or thought was good for us, in each uncanny case, making sure we would find a path, if not the path, to better believing in ourselves. Fern Hill by Dylan Thomas. For Herman. Now, as I was young and easy under the apple boughs, about the lilting house, and happy as the grass was green, the night above the dingle, starry, time let me hail and climb, golden in the heydays of his eyes, and honored among wagons. I was prince of the apple towns, and once below a time, I lordly had the trees and leaves trail with daisies and barley down the rivers of the windfall night. And as I was green and carefree, famous among the barns about the happy yard and singing as the farm was home, in the sun that is young once only, time let me play and be golden in the mercy of his means. And green and golden I was huntsman and herdsman. The calves sang to my horn, the foxes on the hills barked clear and cold, and the Sabbath rang slowly in the pebbles of the holy streams. All the sun long it was running, it was lovely, the hayfield high as the houses, the tunes from the chimneys, it was air and playing, lovely and watery and fire green as grass. And nightly, under the simple stars, as I rode to sleep, the owls were bearing the farm away. All the moon long I heard, blessed among stables, the night jars flying with the ricks and the horses flashing into the dark. And then to awake, and the farm like a wanderer white with dew, come back, the cock on his shoulder? It was all shining, it was Adam and maiden, the sky gathered again and the sun grew round that very day. So it must have been after the birth of the simple light, in the first spinning place, the spellbound horses walking warm out of the whinnying green stable onto the fields of praise. And honored among foxes and pheasants by the gay house under the new-made clouds, and happy as the heart was long, in the sun born over and over, I ran my heedless ways. My wishes raced through the house, high hay, and nothing I cared at my sky-blue trades, that time allows in all his tuneful turning, so few and such morning songs, before the children green and golden follow him out of grace. Nothing I cared in the lamb-white days that time would take me up to the swallow-thronged loft by the shadow of my hand in the noon that is always rising, nor that riding to sleep I should hear him fly with the high fields and wake to the farm forever fled from the childless land. Oh, as I was young and easy in the mercy of his means, time held me green and dying, though I sang in my chains like the sea.
I am Zachary Hayes. I am one of the grandchildren here, one of the 4 of them. In my mind, I sort of have this ingrained image of a Citizen Kane-esque funeral. You know, 2 people standing over a casket in the rain, nobody there but a priest and a manservant, or a chapel like this one with, you know, sparsely populated pews and just nobody there. And I look out and I see all of you people, frankly, very few of whom I know personally, but the fact that there are some of you who are standing back there in a hallway for him listening to me talk on an intercom just says so much. I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where I lived until I was about 4 or 5. And a few years ago, 2006 I think it was, when I was about 11, we were back there visiting. And I remember being out in a cul-de-sac, just hanging out with some of the kids there, and a tall man with a briefcase and a suit came walking by, and he noticed that I was not one of the regulars there, and we chatted for a minute, just, you know, where are you from, yada yada. And I later found out that that was in fact Jerry Adams, one of a large political figure in Northern Ireland, I guess, whose whose role is still largely beyond me, despite the many times my parents have retold this story. And in a way, that's sort of how I feel about Herman right now. You know, I keep thinking to myself as I hear all these people talk, you know, who is this guy? It's been a revealing few months in terms of who he really was to me. And I honestly don't feel like I know or knew an esteemed philosophy professor at the university for 50 years. All of these politics that my dad, Jesse, talked about a few minutes ago might as well be Portuguese if I didn't have some sort of historical context. I knew this guy with, you know, this old guy with no hair and big glasses who occasionally took me to Bears games and sat on the back porch while I did yard work. And if expertise in solving Saturday crossword puzzle clues is any indicator of grand academic stature, then I might have had a clue of his position here. But that's beside the point. Yeah, I always enjoyed talking about sports in school and other mundane things whenever the once every 2 months that we would have dinner over there. And on the side, I happened to know that he was a professor here at the university, which was confirmed when I received an Oxford English Dictionary for my 13th birthday. That's who he was. And I keep hearing all this talk of him as a great magnanimous educator, which frankly, I didn't know him that way. I knew him as Grandpa Herman, as did many of the 3 other grandchildren that are here. And it kind of reminds me of something. Last year, at some point, I went to the website ratemyprofessor.com, which is exactly what it sounds like. And I remember being completely blown away by some of the rave reviews given to him by not his peers, as we've heard from tonight, but his students, people who had not worked with him, who had just known him as an educator. And a couple nights ago, as I was working on this, I went back there and pulled up a few reviews I think should be shared. Mr. Sinaiko was my professor 40 years ago, and I still remember how much I enjoyed his lectures. No other professor equaled him for depth of knowledge and clarity. 40 years ago, he also rated a hot, all capitals, as did his superb TA. Sinaiko is a legend around here, and now I understand why. Simple as that. And lastly, one poster simply gave his thoughts on my grandfather as, "He's not smart and he's not interesting." This post is immediately followed by various ways of saying, "Previous poster is wrong." And I don't really feel the need to delve deeper into what that says. All in all, the main point here is that these 2 people, the esteemed educator and the down-to-earth grandpa, are the same person. You know, one would think that philosophy experts would be the types to be detached from reality in some sort of theoretical la-la land, but the opposite was really true in his case, which, in my opinion, is what made him so incredibly relatable to people, especially us, to whom he never seemed more than simply Grandpa Herman. The last little anecdote that I have in here came just a couple months ago, in his last few weeks. To be brief, usually what one expects from a professor of nearly 60 years upon receiving a fellowship in their name is a typified display of false modesty and dignity. When he learned of the soon-to-be established, or already established, I don't know, Herman L. Sinaiko Fellowship, he had this incredibly large grin and simply said, "Well, it's about damn time." And that's who he was, I think.
It's a very tough act to follow. I spent the month of September in Europe. Just before I left, Kathy and I went to see Herman at his house. We sat on the back porch with him and Susie and talked about Tolstoy. He was facing his next treatment. He also expected to resume teaching in the winter. While I was away, however, his condition deteriorated. By the time I returned, I was told he no longer recognized people. When I walked up to his bedside, he opened his eyes and said, "You're back. I didn't think you were going to make it." He then closed his eyes, apparently searching his memory, and then he reopened them to say, "We read each other's thesis. Didn't like it much." And that was Herman, warm, adversarial. Herman was my oldest friend. I don't remember when we first met, but it was 60 years ago, give or take. For some periods, we met every day. Other periods, a long time would pass, but we were always able to pick up exactly where we left off. We were academic friends. We didn't share much about our marriages and divorces and children. We talked about books and ideas and academic policy and politics. Since we both cared passionately about those things, that was our kind of intimacy. We had both come to the college as early entrants, that college which was labeled in the New Yorker the greatest collection of juvenile neurotics since the Children's Crusade. We both believed that a careful study of the great books would bring us wisdom, especially Plato. One year, we met regularly in a booth in Steinway's drugstore, where Noodles, etc. is now, to discuss the Republic, which I was just beginning to be able to read in Greek. We were comrades. We were expelled by Leo Strauss from his classes for asking a few rather deferential questions. That is, Herman was expelled, and I, as his co-offender, of course, went with him. We enjoyed ourselves. We used to play a game we invented, a kind of can you top this of unread great books. One would say, "I've never read Paradise Lost," and the other would say, "Well, I've never read Don Quixote." Herman was already an established college teacher in 1960 when I joined the faculty. I started in social thought, teaching graduate students who were mostly older than I was. Herman gave me my first college course, Humanities 3. The syllabus started with 2 weeks on Aristotle's Poetics. I panicked and said, "I can say everything I have to say about the Poetics in about 20 minutes. Herman replied, "You're not supposed to be instructing these students on Aristotle. You're supposed to be teaching them how to read, how to pay good attention to what's on the page in front of them." That worked, and I've never looked back. Now we not only read each other's theses, but we were able to teach together. We taught a course on the Republic that drew 40 or 50 students, all but 2 or 3 of them auditors. Those were the days. We took turns presenting, and the rule was the other could interrupt at any time. My teaching style at that time was, you say something and I'll disagree with you. And since Herman's was pretty much the same, this made for some lively classes. It sometimes took us half an hour after class to rebuild our friendship, but we always met each other. We were college people at a time during Kimpton's presidency when the college was small and somewhat neglected, and the college people pretty embattled. We were reduced to forming a somewhat surreptitious group with Don Levine and a visiting scientist named Al Stern to meet, talk about the college, and generate memoranda, which I don't think anybody ever read. Then Edward Levy became provost and appointed Wayne Booth as dean of the college, and everything changed. Don became master of social sciences. I was asked to create the new collegiate division, and of course Herman and I did that together. We set out to create a world of thoroughly pluralistic innovation. This brought together some very interesting and difficult people. I remember one meeting in which Milton Singer and Charles Wagner got into such a fierce and rather nasty wrangle that I slapped the table, said, "This meeting is adjourned, you will be notified when there is another," and walked out of the room. Herman then went around and made peace. If Redfield was going to be bad cop, Sinaiko was ideally suited to be good cop since everybody liked him. All this was a long time ago. In the intervening years, we mostly led parallel lives, continuing to exchange ideas, gossip, students, projects. When he was dean of students, I served on the undergraduate disciplinary committee, and together we saw the college from its dark side. Only last year, he buttonholed me crossing campus and asked me to join his project for getting the great books into Chicago schools. Of course, I accepted, but I remember wondering if I still had the strength to keep up with him. When someone dies, they leave a space in the world, the exact shape of the person who is gone. The dead are present to us in the form of their absence, and in that form we meet them nearly every day. Every time I walk by the tower of the Unitarian Church on 57th Street, I look up to where the spire used to be. It was very tall and handsome, and on top of it, it had the only reliable weather vane in Hyde Park, important information to the runner I used to be. Herman reminds me of that spire. He was very much there. He stood for higher things, and he always knew which way the wind was blowing.
I want to thank everybody so much for coming. And please come next door to Swift. As Dad would say, where's the food? It's next door.
People wonder why I flinch whenever they go like this. Sorry. I thought it was from